Welcome everybody, I'm so glad you guys are here today. And today we're gonna have a trip down memory lane together, and you'll be introduced to a character named Whirlpool. Now Whirlpool is a character I made up 10, 11 years ago when I first started drawing. And over the years I went back to him and made a new design, a villain and all that, but it never really amounted to much. And I am not necessarily one for writing. So probably 3 years into this journey, I enlisted help of my good buddy Josh. He was the writer of this guy and I was the artist. He made the origin, the love interest, the villain, all that stuff. But we have not touched this project in 8 years. So I thought today I would go back and give him a redesign, a revamp. But while I'm drawing in this video, I'm gonna be reading you guys the story that Josh wrote that was 8 years ago. Now it's a rough draft, we didn't really have anything more than like the key points of the story, but it's too late not to share. I will also be bringing you guys through my original designs, and we can see all the changes and evolution over the years. So we're getting very nostalgic today. So let's get started. But before we get in the story, I'm just going to tell you a quick background of our three main characters in this story. So obviously the first one is Whirlpool. His real life human person name was Ted Taylor. Now conveniently enough, of course, he worked at a nuclear dam. He lives far from his parents. He can barely afford to stay up on his rent. And he's always been somewhat of a drifter, you know, a nomad. He's kind of trying to find his place in the world. And he has a love interest at his job whose name is Catherine Bemis. Now this Catherine character, I believe, is his higher up. She's a manager at the nuclear dam, but now her home life and background is a little sad. Her father rejected her, so she got the hell out of town. She moved as far away as she could from him, but she's a very smart, very intelligent character. She knows her science and mechanics, hence her occupation. Now for the villain, Walter Redding, the necrotic bomber. Now his occupation says bomb and weapons expert, comma, madman. Now a little of his background, he lost his mother at a very young age and was raised in a healthy, rich household, but was not the favorite son. So of course he's got the childhood trauma, but now as a grown man, he's lost his sanity after being in nuclear radiation for years. No sense of mercy or common sense. Alright, so that was the basic background of our three main characters of our story. Now our whole story takes place in Seattle, Washington, and the reason for that is because our character is water-based. There's the whole stereotype, if it's true or not, I don't know, that it rains a lot in Seattle. Rain is water, more power for our hero. You know, great idea, we were really creative. Alright, so I thought we'd take a break from that for a second, and I'd show you guys how Whirlpool came to be and his evolution through the years with a new costume, face, all that stuff. So here we have the very first Whirlpool design back when he was actually Whirlwind, hence the two W's right there. You can see some designs going on here, practicing my weird little lobster hands here, some very creative logos, and for some reason I was working with C and M for a long time. No idea what that's about. So we all have our humble beginnings, but probably a year or two after this we moved on to our new design, which is what we have going on here. Now I believe the reason that I changed from Whirlwind to Whirlpool is because I wanted to make a character that did not share a name with anybody from Marvel. Marvel has this villain named Whirlwind, so I thought we'll keep it somewhat similar. Instead of air, we'll go to water. And his first ever villain that I made is this guy named Arctic Freeze. Again, I originally wanted his name to be Blizzard, but Marvel again has a character named Blizzard, so Arctic Freeze was not taken, so that's what I went with. Here's our first design. He has a little snowflake-esque thingy on his neck, I don't know. So he'll be shooting ice, because I thought, okay, ice will freeze his water, Whirlpool will be helpless against him, and should make for a cool story. But I also made a secondary design for him with a mask that I remember smudging really bad and being so upset about, but a very similar costume. Keeping the little snowflake design, but now going into a big cape here. But this is where we were on hold for a few years. And then we brought in the next iteration of Whirlpool. Now I also found these design pages I have for his costume, sort of starting to solidify my final idea for the most recent costume before today. And here's the new logo that I liked so much and I'm putting on his forehead. I wanted some different eyes for his mask as well, but knowing me, of course, I had to throw in some Spidey options, but I tried to stay away from it as best I could because I just cannot help myself. And over here I'm messing around with the chest logo, and oh look, more Spider-Man eyes. Now this design process here brought us to our newest design before today, which is what we have right here. We have some improvements in the water drawing, of course. I think I was just getting into inking my characters at this point. Brought the W logo up from his chest to his forehead with a slightly different design with sort of rings coming up from it, and a design that was somewhat of a whirlpool swirling around from his chest. Now I made a copy of this so I could try out some coloring options for his suit. Pretty simple, similar to my last design. Then we had this version as well, black and blue version, a little darker, a little cooler, but I think in the end we did end up going with this guy. And this is the time that Josh was coming in and started writing out the story for him. So of course I needed to make what the man behind the mask looked like as well. So here I found two different pages of attempts to make what Ted Taylor would look like. So I have some notes here. Clean cut, young adult, 20 to 25, average build, strong. Now faces have never been my strong suit even to this day. And I think I was trying to work out a hairdo here, I guess. And I guess I liked the little spiky front haircut. And I tried a few head shapes with a little longer, more slender one, or a little more bulky of a chin. Then we come over here and I do some more hair designs. I guess I like this one a lot, so I wrote yes right next to it. But over here, not so much, as I wrote ugly across his forehead. Now that's actually all I have on Ted Taylor and Whirlpool over the years. Now back to the new drawing. Now it is story time, you guys. But all that we could find is a bit of a rough draft, not written out panel for panel, but we have a series of key points in the story. So we begin our story as we're exposed to our protagonist, Mr. Ted Taylor, as he's on his way to work, learning a bit on his personal life, him being a drifter, being far from home, all that good stuff. And upon arriving at work, Ted Taylor's boss, Mr. Johnston, yells and scolds at him for not checking up on the new nuclear turbines, as some of their levels, I guess, were a little bit too high. Now again, it's Ted's job to manage this and make sure it doesn't get dangerous. So of course his boss threatens to fire him, but Ted wants his job. He apologizes and promises it will not happen again. Now our attention is brought somewhere else. We approach a hidden military base up in the woods of northeastern Seattle, and here we see two men both dressed in black combat gear, and they're talking about an escaped prisoner from their base by the name of Walter Redding. They call a man on a cell phone, calling him Dr. Orion, and they continue their search for the escaped convict. Now we come back to our protagonist, Ted Taylor, as he's now quietly doing his job when he's approached by the lovely Catherine Beamish, a co-worker as well as his manager. From there, she apologizes to Ted for Mr. Johnston. They keep talking, they hit it off. We see a slight hint at their future romance. Now we cut back over to our antagonist, Walter Redding, who we now see in the flesh, who is now hiding out in an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle. He is talking on the cell phone to a mysterious voice, saying things like, "Yes, sir," and "It will be done, sir." As he puts his phone down, we pan over and we see his huge arsenal of weaponry. That again, he is an expert on all things weapons and bombs and all that stuff. Now we're bringing it back to Mr. Ted Taylor. We see him now alone late at night, reflecting on his bad day at work, when suddenly this alarm goes off, which notifies him that the levels on the new nuclear turbine are getting way too high and it's getting very dangerous. Not wanting to get into any more trouble with his boss, Ted books it right on into work. When he arrives, he sees it's malfunctioning, unsure what to do in this panic. We see him slam his hand on the emergency shutoff button, but instead of shutting down, the turbine unleashes this huge wave of radiation, striking Ted, sending him over the dam and into the water unconscious. Later on, we see him wake up at the bottom of the river, and of course he's quickly realizing that he's underwater, but he's breathing, he's totally fine, which of course freaks the man out. He's panicking and he's frantically crawling up to the surface, but now to his surprise, he finds himself rising at a high rate. Once he breaks to the surface, he's standing up on his own personal spring of water, confused out of his mind. So of course, he's not believing what's happening. He's figuring it's just a freak accident. So he heads back to his apartment, just lost and confused at what just happened, and goes to bed. Now I'm going to show you some of my design work for some supporting characters. Now I couldn't find a whole lot, but I have some for his love interest and of course the villain. So let's take a look. Now unfortunately, this is all I could find for his love interest, Catherine Beamish, and I believe all that I was doing here was trying to think of some cool hair designs that she might have. Now I'm pretty sure I just googled comic book women hair, and I just drew what I found on the internet. So we had the curls, some waves, straight, short, a bun thingy going on. So I gave myself plenty of options. But now for the villain. Now this is the only page I have of the villain, the necrotic bomber. Now I wrote down some notes. His name is Walter Redding. He has bandoliers with grenades. He has holsters for his pistols, a rifle strapped on his back, burns/scars on the left side of his face, a bigger build, hard chin, stubble, question mark. And I gotta say, my gun's up there, honestly, not bad. I remember I was trying to practice how to draw explosions, and that's really the best I had at the time. Armbands with grenades, question mark. Then we have some facial designs. I remember almost giving him a hat for whatever reason, unsure. But here was the very rough design. Some holsters for his weapons, a utility belt with grenades, some straps with ammo and more grenades. But on this side was supposed to be my final design, but you can see I made him a tad slimmer in this version, but kept as much weaponry as I possibly could. But this is as far as I got with the guy. Now that is all my behind the scenes design process over the years. Now back to the drawing. Now the next day at work, we find a long piece of metal got somehow stuck in one of the nuclear turbines. As all the workers look over the railing to look at the problem, Ted turns to call for his boss to tell him about the problem. As he looks back though, he hears his coworkers screaming as the metal is flung out by all the pressure in the turbine, impaling itself into the shoulder of Ted Taylor. He falls to the ground, his coworkers are surrounding him, and Catherine Beamish comes running down to him. Once the shock has worn off though, Ted finds out that he's actually fine. He's feeling no pain and just goes ahead and rips out the big piece of metal in his chest. And and we're even seeing his puncture wound start to close up. As things begin to settle, Ted looks at the piece of metal in his hand reading AMO, and before he can even comprehend what that means, an explosion rings out behind him, and the necrotic bomber emerges. He tells the crowd he is here to take their nuclear turbines, and whoever gets in his way will be annihilated. But we have some brave employees here. They revolt and they attempt to detain him, but before they can reach him, a small army of robots comes in behind Redding, and chaos begins. The necrotic bomber makes his way over to the turbines, where we see Ted standing his ground. The bomber tells him to move, get out of his way, but Ted refuses, and their fight begins. Their fight takes him overboard, falling back into that same river Ted was in the night before. As we pan over to the water, we see Redding fly out, but no Ted. He is dazed, still sinking, but the water's giving him strength. He's starting to understand and grasp his powers, and he again comes up to the surface on his own personal spring. We see Ted understanding his powers, controlling the water, finding his new strength, and Ted and the necrotic bomber get back to their climactic battle. As the battle continues, the necrotic bomber mutters, "Die with them," and grabs a grenade off his chest and tosses it towards Taylor. But at the last moment, Ted controls a huge wave of water, sending the explosion back towards the bomber himself. It explodes, making a huge hole inside of the dam and seemingly killing the necrotic bomber. As Ted catches his breath, after he ensures everyone's alright, Ted tries to leave and run off, afraid of putting all his people in danger. As he tries to leave the dam, he gets caught by none other than Catherine Bemis. She stops him. She wants answers. She wants to know what happened, and she does not want him to leave. But Ted tells her he has to. He has to go learn his powers and find a way to control them and use them for good. She pleads for him to stay, but his mind is made up, but promising her that she'll see him again as he turns off to jump into the water. Now a month later, we find our new hero, Ted Taylor, on some rooftop in Seattle at night, donning a makeshift mask and costume, when suddenly these two men appear behind him. They introduce themselves as Agent Inferno and Agent Patriot. Ted asks why they're here, what they want. The two men ignore his questions and ask Ted about the dam accident. Ted refuses to answer any of their questions, but the two men insist, and they tell him that they're actually here to recruit him. They tell Ted they work to make a difference, and he is high on their list of recruits. Ted looks back at him and says, "Alright, you got my attention. Who'd you say you work for again?" And it goes black. But of course, we got a little teaser for the next one. It cuts to a dimly lit room, and we see the necrotic bomber, alive, but now with horrible scarring on the side of his face. We see him sitting and talking to somebody in the dark. He tells the man in the shadows that someone was waiting for him at the dam, a living whirlpool. He continuously apologizes, begging for mercy. The room goes quiet, and we see the man in the shadows stand up into the light, the ringmaster. He says to the bomber, "Our enemies are assembling much faster than we thought." He says the time to act is now. They must start their plan. As two more dark figures emerge from the shadows, and the ringmaster smiles. And there we have our origin story for Whirlpool, and now please enjoy the final reveal of our drawing. And there we have it. This was a lot of fun for me, actually. So please comment down below. I'm actually really curious to see what you guys think about this one. A very different kind of video for me, but if you're a fan, let me know. And if you're new here, feel very free to subscribe, as it warms my heart. Thank you for everybody who has. I also got a video right here that I'm sure you'll enjoy if you like this one. And until next time, deuces.